office?
Sure, sure. My name is Sean Allen. I'm a sergeant with the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office. I've been there for a combined total of about 32 years. Married father of 4. I am also a native of Santa Clara County. I was born at Stanford Hospital. We lived in East Palo Alto at the time. Then we moved to Palo Alto and by the time I started school, we were living in San Jose. I grew up in a very interesting household where, I didn't know my biological father until I was in my 30s. And I was raised by a father who wasn't my biological father, but he and my mother, they grew up in a different era. So they taught me about culture and diversity and so on. And they were very strong in their morals about treating people equally. And so that's what I did. I played high school. I played sports in high school. I'm a lifelong martial artist. I started martial arts when I was very young, and it's one of the things that I attribute that kept me out of trouble. And then, of course, I was enlisted in the military for a couple of years, and I was honorably discharged. And once I got out, I went to Evergreen Valley College initially, and while I was doing that, I was working at a company called Silicon Graphics in Mountain View. And I was just, learning the tech world, and and continuing to follow my dream of law enforcement. That was kind of part of the culture that I was brought up in. So my dad, who raised me, he was former military and former law enforcement. So that's was part of the drive. But when I really took interest of it was when I was 19 years old, actually fresh out of the military, and I was wrongfully arrested in our county for something I didn't do. So the way police work works in jail systems and courts is if you get arrested, which I did on a Friday, I had to stay in jail an entire weekend, and Monday was a holiday, so that included the holiday. So I didn't get released till Tuesday, and that was a very enlightening experience. Even though I was very familiar with the culture, I have family members that were involved in a lifestyle that's not one of legality. So I understood the culture, but I also knew that it was I didn't want to be treated the way I was, not only by the incarcerated people that were there when I was wrongfully arrested, but also by the staff. And so that really motivated me to pursue law enforcement. So while I was in junior college, I was a student intern in the district attorney's office, Bureau of Investigations, and I worked with 3 different investigators, and 2 of them were former deputy sheriffs. And so they pushed me towards the sheriff's office, and I became a reserve deputy sheriff. And then less than a couple of years later, I got hired in the Department of Corrections. It's now also the sheriff's office, it's a branch of the sheriff's office. So I spent about 7 years working patrol, gangs, dignitary protection, and a number of other assignments, recruiting. I ran our cadet program, and then I went to the jails, and I basically did the same thing as I did a lot of work with gang members. I really got involved early in my career in training, so that's part of the culture that I'm really involved in, and definitely is training and teaching and rebuilding the things that the public has recognized as systemic failures within law enforcement. And I do that through a hands-on approach. So being a supervisor, I supervise a team of about 93 deputies, and we are very involved in de-escalation. As part of my expertise. It comes from my martial art background. I taught a scenario-based training in the academy, which is based on identifying people in crisis and how to respond to them and assist them. And so I spent a career in doing that. And then part of my other expertise in law enforcement is I did a lot of union work. I ran our largest union, and I currently run our smallest union, which is comprised of supervisors and managers. So that's another aspect of dealing with administrative issues and contracts and benefit packages for law enforcement, advocating for them, but also what I've strongly represented in my career is identifying what I call the elephant in the room, a police culture, the subcultures that police don't want to show the public. So that elephant in the room, I'm willing to talk about because it's what is driving the sentiment today, and it's what we need to change.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for your service. And I think it was really, really amazing to hear about your personal accounts with law enforcement as a young adult. I think that is super impactful, especially to young adults around Santa Clara County like me. One of the questions I have about that is, I personally have been interested in local politics, but why do you think high schoolers should care about local politics, and who's the sheriff in their county?
Well, this is my first time running, so it's been involved and experienced experience for me as well. And of course, it's being engaged teaches you new lessons about life and the direction. So what I've learned uh, early on, even before I got involved in politics, was that these are the people that are creating the change. You're representing the public and the public's need and desires. And if you're doing a good job, then you're successfully representing the public. And the sheriff is a different role than police chiefs. The sheriff is sheriff of each county. In California has 58 counties and 58 elected sheriffs. They are tasked with ensuring that the public's constitutional rights are respected and adhered to. So it's a big responsibility. And I've seen a failure in the culture, as I mentioned earlier, and I think that this is the best way for me to contribute to the community that I grew up in, that I live here. I live here.
Yes, thank you. So you mentioned like how you see a bunch like issues in the current law enforcement. I was wondering if you could maybe outline what those are and maybe how you would be willing or find a way to change it with if you were in office or as sheriff.
So I do a lot of reading and studying. So there's a lot of studies that show different patterns, and those patterns and practices contribute to our community of law enforcement. So when you're a chief of police or a sheriff, you're responsible for hiring, firing, training, and promoting, which dictates most of the culture. And what a lot of studies have identified is there's systemic inequities throughout the law enforcement process, from the time a person has an interaction with law enforcement to their possible incarceration and to their adjudication. And so when I entered law enforcement in this county, at sheriff's office is about 1,400 people, and there was 9 African Americans. There were about 32 Hispanics. There was less than 6 Asians. And there was a less representation of females. We had about 50. So what we noticed is that it was white male predominant. And so there's studies that show that, for example, I was just reading something last night where it said that the most recent study will show that when you have a diverse community of law enforcement officers, you have a less use of force and less arrests, because there's a different interaction. And when you involve law enforcement officers that are reflective of the community, the interactions are less combustible, there's less violence. So that culture is part of what we see today. We see subcliques existing. I mean, look at LA County, they're going through what they've identified as deputy gangs. And I wouldn't say we have those here, but we definitely have cliques, and those cliques contribute to nepotism and cronyism, which impact how we promote and how we develop employees, which impacts the services we provide to the community.
Thank you. I think it's great how promoting diversity is a priority. And one of my questions is, how would you be able to make sure any new officers are thoroughly trained before entering the field?
So, presently California law has, it identifies 3 levels of academies. We have what we call, what you see in like probation officers and juvenile hall officers, which is a 5-week academy. Our jail officers in this county go through a 14 to 16-week academy, and then patrol officers in our department go through a 6-month academy. It's basically a semester of college. And that's not enough. I mean, you look at some European countries, and they actually have a 2-year prerequisites and training. And we kind of do that in California, but we require like a certain level. The academies are actually college accredited, so the person gets a quarter or a semester, as I mentioned, of school. And then in some institutions and some organizations, I should say, we actually require additional college. We do have a consistent practice of training, which is college accredited as well, but it's basically 8 to 16 hours every couple of years, which is not enough. So the idea for me is to increase training, identify through the things we've identified, especially specifically being problematic. So, a de-escalation, again, how we're interacting with people of color, how we're impacting marginalized communities, and one of the biggest things is substance abuse, unhoused, and then mental health. And so, since the California, like many states, eliminated state hospitals for people challenged with mental health, what we're seeing is jail being the only resort for people who have mental health issues, and we're not trained for that. Law enforcement is not trained for long-term care of people who are challenged with mental health. So the idea is to incorporate, for me, is to incorporate additional mental health professionals in our field, and also give them some police power so they can feel safe while they're interacting with people who are in crisis. And so if we do that post arrest, we can probably prevent arrest. If we do more of that while people are incarcerated, we can reduce recidivism and actually provide people with treatment, whereas incarceration won't be the only alternative. And it will if we're only doing incarceration, we're going to repeat recidivism. So the idea is to reduce it. Our jail population is about half of what it normally is. We have a capacity of about 5,000 people. We're down about 2,500, but that's actually at a cost of about, I like to tell people this because it's very true. It's at a cost of about $100,000 per person a year. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about putting someone in jail who stole, say, a candy bar or even vandalized a car, all victims deserve justice, but the value, actually they say the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So $100 crime is not worth $100,000 a year, because the person will likely get arrested, be incarcerated, and can't afford the bail. So we're going to end up taking care of that person for a year. So there has to be alternatives to all those things, and post incarceration alternatives, which since the sheriff department took over the jails in 2010, we've reduced them. We need to increase those options and opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think making mental health a priority is really important, and focusing rather on punishment than on reform for incarcerated individuals is a key thing towards like law enforcement and becoming more progressive. So one of my questions was, in what ways would you be able, or do you have any like plan to incorporate mental health as a priority for the incarcerated?
That is the biggest priority. So we've identified, we have a present population right around 2,500. And what we have identified is that 40% of the people there incarcerated are challenged with mental health. And we presently only have about 48 beds for those people where they can get constant care. So what we're seeing is this constant rotation and triage. And before people are stabilized and given proper treatment, we push them right back into the system, so the cycle starts over. So the idea again is the county has elected to look at the option, or at least building a new jail. And my thought process is that we don't necessarily need a new jail. We need a place specifically to treat people who are challenged with mental health. And I would like to see that versus building a new jail and just warehousing people and perpetuating the problem.
All right, thank you so much. Moving forward, when these incarcerated individuals leave jail, how would you help prevent them from repeating the same mistakes? Because as of right now, I'm pretty sure there's a high overturn rate of people going back into jail. So is there any way you think that would help, like with that current problem in the law enforcement?
So what we see is, especially working in sheriff's offices, we literally have people that would get released and they have no other option but to be unhoused. So some of those individuals will literally commit crime just to come back in jail, so they can have a roof over their head and 3 meals a day. So the idea is to change their productivity and give them other options, give them options at education, jobs, access to computers. And we had programs established prior to, again, 2010. We had a phase 2 project where we actually did that. We allowed them to come to our facilities, an early release program, and we gave them access to computers. We actually taught them classes so they can get their GEDs and their high school diplomas. And we again, that kind of fell by the wayside. So I want to reestablish and rebuild those programs and offer more, because If not, again, we're going to keep seeing the same thing and the unhoused problem, and give people also options to substance abuse. We have some alternatives, but just not enough. And this is what I like to say. Well, you look at the statistics. Statistically, this county, Santa Clara County, is in the top 20 wealthiest counties in the country, and so the resources are here. We're just not applying them. So we either spend the money in incarcerating people, or we can spend the same money in prevention and treatment. And that's the idea, is redirecting those resources so we can do that and reduce the impact to recidivism.
Right. I think it's a good idea to implement these programs as well. I think that would really help with stopping the continuous cycle that's been happening. My next question is, since the past few years, there's definitely been a little distrust between the public and police through like different events that have happened. And I'm wondering, is there any way you'd help create a transparency between the public and the police, or help create a stronger bond where both parties feel safe?
Well, as a leader, I believe in being engaged. Again, this is my community. I grew up here, so I'm not a sit behind the desk kind of person, right? So, in my ideas, some of the things I've seen that we failed at is just that. There's a lack of accountability. There's a lack of appropriate reforms, and there's a lack of transparency. And so, as sheriff, you have to enforce the laws and the rights of everyone, not just the public, but also your staff. So the staff has what we call the Peace Officer Bill of Rights, and it protects their due process when they're accused of misconduct. So those things have to be respected, but we have this fence. And again, you see I always look at, when I would drive on the street, I see these thin blue line stickers on people's cars. Well, it represents something different to many people, and it's basically represents silence to a large part of the police community, that we don't let people in. So the idea for me is to let people in. We can do things like produce video footage earlier. We can still do it in a way we're protecting our staff by, if necessary, if it's too early or preliminary investigation, covering up people's faces and name tags, and just showing the public earlier the circumstances and not identifying the people for privacy reasons and for legal reasons. And let that process take its course. I mean, this is Silicon Valley. We have the technology to do that. So being transparent is very key, is a huge thing for me. I've done that. There's things that are going on now that we see with our current sheriff and our current status of our department that I've brought forward and exposed, because there was a lack of transparency. And so my idea is that we have a lot of police executives with a whole lot of background and education, and what we're still seeing across the country is consistent failure. Right, the public sentiment is that we're not doing things right. We're not doing enough, and so the idea for me is to do something different, and that means is that we have to be transparent. We have to share, but we have to invite them in. So my idea is to, again, establish an oversight that actually has I say teeth, but actually has bites. So the subpoena power is not something I would object to, and actually police chiefs and sheriffs can actually deputize things like an oversight committee, and now you've legally invited them into the realm of our environment, and they can see things firsthand while keeping the confidence and privacy of all the individuals involved, both witnesses, suspects, and staff members that are accused of misconduct.
Thank you. I completely agree. Honesty and just transparency are so vital. And also, yes, in the court of justice, I think, as I've researched and learned over the years, the footage from body-worn cameras has been extremely crucial in a lot of court cases. So my question is, what are your opinions on body-worn cameras and how they should be implemented in Santa Clara County law enforcement? And how do you see yourself implementing body-worn cameras under your administration?
So I was one of those that was initially not happy about cameras, but I also entered this profession with some good teachers who told me that you should always work as if you're being watched by the public, because that's who you work for. And so what was uncomfortable to me is how we were using it and who controls it, and that comes from an ethics point. Right now, what you see is that the administration of law enforcement controls the content recovered through body worn cameras, and I think that's wrong. It's wrong because I've seen body worn camera footage come up missing when there's questions of misconduct. I've seen so the idea of body worn cameras and how it's controlled, I think is wrong. But I do think it was definitely a good idea because it does keep some truths. And what I mean by that is, for example, I've been wrongfully accused of misconduct. I had a person say I twisted them up and did something I shouldn't have done in the jails many years ago. And it was right like within a week after we were issued body worn cameras, and I used that body worn camera to clear me. I never touched the person. So the idea of body worn cameras is great. It's just how it's controlled, and it needs to be more transparent and how we're using it. And so there's things like you see this all the time where officers will say, you see this across the country when there's misconduct or questions of misconduct. You see people saying, well, I didn't turn my body camera on, or I attempted to and it failed, or the battery ran did. Those are the control factors that I think needs to be controlled better.
Right. Absolutely. I think they're definitely not perfect, but living in the heart of Silicon Valley, there's definitely room for a lot of progress towards the devices. And I have read about like covering or like not getting the right angle or covering the camera, which ended up with a lot of problems like later on in different cases. And I think there's definitely room for improvement. So I appreciate that. So my last question is, I personally live in Cupertino, which uses Santa Clara County's police department. So my question is, how will you build trust with citizens in Cupertino, and so they wouldn't get their own department and keep using Santa Clara Police Department?
Well, that's a good question, and that question to me as a law enforcement officer has to do with. So let me tell you just a little bit about what the city of Cupertino and the contractors are getting differently than a police officer. As I mentioned before, so deputy sheriffs typically in most counties have to work in the jails, and what that does give you is it gives you a police officer, a professional that knows how to deal with people in crisis, because everyone who's incarcerated is in crisis just by the sheer circumstances of why they're there. So our deputies have to do that without a gun on, because we don't wear firearms in the jail, without batons on. We don't wear batons in the jail. We don't wear tasers, and we don't have tasers in our department as well. So what it teaches you in that confined space is how to deal with people in crisis and how to effectively communicate, because language is the best way to resolve problems and get along. So and the other thing it teaches you where working in the jails is dealing with people who actually want to be part of the criminal element, because not everyone in jail is different from prison. Not everyone in jail is a criminal. Some people are presumption of innocence there, but some people have a history of criminality, and so our people are trained through that interaction on how to deal with that. So when we transition to patrol, that's what you're getting. You're getting an experienced officer who's learned how to talk to people without firearms, without a baton, and then identify those behaviors. So when you put them out in the community, that experience, and it's been proven through certain levels of statistics and certain research that there's actually you get a more proactive, aggressive, not proactive, but you get a more proactive law enforcement officer with less complaints, because they've learned those kind of techniques. It doesn't mean we're complaint free. Obviously, we're not, and we're misconduct free. We're not, but it gives you a better trained officer. So that's part of the benefit. I think that I worked in Cupertino. I've worked patrol in Cupertino before. I worked patrol in Saratoga. I think our present services are highly respected. You get a lot of specialty treatment when you have a contract such as this, as where sometimes when you deal with certain police departments, the systemic failures. What I mean by that is you get the complacency sometimes, and so a contract forces us to perform and continue to perform, right? And that's what we need to do to provide the public with the best public safety services that can be provided.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate, once again, you taking the time for this interview. I loved hearing your input and your insight, and I wish the best for your election. And if it's all right with you, I'd love to post this recording on my blog, and I could also send it to you if you would want to post it anywhere as well.
Sure, absolutely. And one more thing is, there's one thing I want people to take into account when they're thinking about police work. And this is coming from me as a leader, a trainer, a union leader, is that wherever you, the community, and I'm in this part of this community to identify police misconduct. There's one direct correlation to police misconduct, or I should say there's a direct correlation to two things, and that is it's poor leadership and poor training. Anytime you can identify police misconduct, it always will be attached to poor leadership and poor training. And so it's up to the community and the leaders of the police departments and sheriff departments to let the community in, so they can hold not just the police officers or deputy sheriffs, but the police administrators accountable. That's the way you get positive reform.
Thank you so much. I think
Thank you
that's
so
a great
much.
thing to end on. So thank you once again. I will send this recording to you, and I really appreciate it.
No worries. And thank you. I really appreciate your interest, and I really appreciate your time as well.
Thank you. Have a